And that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Bill Davis and the VVAW activist panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming here today. Please bear with me. I've been a little bit ill recently, but I have everything I need to keep my voice working here, at least for the duration of this panel. In 1967, 6 Vietnam vets stepped into the street in New York City behind a banner that read, "Vietnam Veterans Against the War," creating, 30 years ago, a history and a legacy. I'm sorry. I have been a little ill. 40 years ago, creating a legacy and a history of a veterans organization that has never been equaled. What followed, as tens became hundreds and hundreds became thousands, and VVAW became the first major organization of veterans ever to return from a war that was still in progress and lead the fight against that war. What followed was an incredible series of actions and activities. First, Operation Raw, as veterans marched through New Jersey to eventually to Valley Forge and shattered their M16s that they'd carried, carrying out from town to town throughout Pennsylvania and New Jersey, a guerrilla warfare, guerrilla theater that became a prominent portion of the sort of actions that VVAW became famous for. And Operation Raw spawned 1,000 Operation Raws as people marched all over the country in July 4th parades, places we were banned from, down city streets. It became an earmark of the type of work that we would begin. The Winter Soldier investigation that followed broke open the atrocities and the level of genocide that was being carried out in the name of the American people in Vietnam. And it was so effective that it's still being attacked to this very day by the people who had diminished. Dewey Canyon 3, already bigger than Woodstock. More people were at Dewey Canyon 3 than were at the Super Bowl last year. Truly an incredible action. The returning of the medals being thrown back onto the steps of the Capitol building, and the film and the clips and the pictures from that are still standard stock when anyone talks about veterans and anti-war movements in the Vietnam War. And I run into people who were grade school age at that time. That is an indelible image that is forever burnt into the mind of the American history and the US involvement in Vietnam. Dewey Canyon 3 spawned other Dewey Canyons. Dewey Canyon 4 in 1975, under the banners of decent benefits for all veterans, universal and unconditional amnesty with particular emphasis on veterans and GIs who were suffering without amnesty, and also end the war. That was 1974, excuse me. That, in a lot of ways, was a high water mark in its own right. When VVAW marched out of the park on the second day of that demonstration, the Metro Police of Washington, D.C. administered a brutal beating on the front ranks of that march, unlike anything seen outside of the civil rights movement in this country. And the front ranks of that march continued on and administered a brutal beating to the Metro DC police unlike they have never seen in their lives. We're an organization for peace and justice, who were not necessarily pacifists. We're an organization that was proudly built of volunteers, not only people who volunteered to be in the Vietnam, which many of us were, but also, and I'm not diminishing you brothers that got drafted, believe me, but also an organization of volunteers, of people who would step forward when needed. And on that day, I wish we had the pictures here today in our archives of the big stack of Metro scooters piled up and all the police lying on the ground in front of them. It's a... Interesting. That's okay. Let it rip. A few years later, we returned for Dewey Canyon 5, with the emphasis being our rights to march, and finally allowed as an organization into the gates of Arlington Cemetery, where we saw many of people we knew, their names on the headstones, from members of EVAW to Medgar Evers. Just an incredible moment, an emotional moment. Also at that demonstration, we focused primarily on the scourge of Agent Orange and how it was killing us, and what it had done to our children. One of the more interesting moments of that particular, two of the more interesting moments of that particular action were the fact that early in the march, early in the demonstrations, we were approached by a number of members of the DC Metro Police. There'd been a pretty big turnover in their ranks, and a lot of these people were now Vietnam veterans. And they approached us as brothers and invited us to their bars when they were off duty to drink with them and talk about what we had in common. Also, behind us, where we were camped, was work going on the Art Institute. And when the park police lined up early one foggy morning, 100 of them on horseback to drive us once again from our historic campground in front of the Capitol, we were bolstered by the fact that if they had attacked the construction workers, were going to attack the police with their equipment. It was an interesting Dewey Canyon 5. There were two times we were in the Statue of Liberty. One time in 1971, brothers from the East Coast decried the Hanoi, Haiphong Harbor Christmas bombings and the bombing and targeting of civilian areas, including hospitals, schools, and churches, and synagogues, and whatever kind of structures existed in those two towns. And once again in 1975, when the Veterans Administration, without any notice, cut off 5.6 million veterans of benefits, veterans who were veterans between the Korean War and the Vietnam War. And we felt that it was unconscionable. That second seizure of the Statue of Liberty still holds the record for 18 hours. In 1972, the last patrol, beginning in several different areas of the country. VVAW started a car caravan that would eventually meet in Miami at the 1972 Republican Convention. And at that Republican Convention, we would march through the streets showing VVAW's opposition to the war, the continuing war into the Nixon administration. And the March to the Fontainebleau is considered one of the all-time famous anti-war marches, as over 5,000 Vietnam veterans marched to the Fontainebleau Hotel and cornered Nixon and his cronies in their luxury suites. marching with us, obviously, were a lot of our brothers, and a lot of them were disabled and had been wounded in a lot of ways that we're seeing with our younger brothers and sisters now in Iraqi Vietnam Veterans Against the War. And with us that day was a writer named Hunter Thompson. And his article that he wrote in Rolling Stone, excuse me, about that march, whenever I review it, it never fails to, well, I mean, look, just thinking about it, what it does to me now. But it was an incredible thing, as 5,000 Vietnam Veterans Against the War opposed Nixon's 6 Vietnam veterans for a just peace inside the convention. And everyone remembers the activities of Ron Kovic that day, and how it's been shown in film, and the things that he and the other brothers that forced their way onto the convention floor had to face, and yet the way it helped turn the tide of that war. We marched, probably our largest march ever was the second Nixon inaugural. It was a brutally cold, muddy day. We marched in Washington. Many of the brothers wanted to break out of the march and go to the Ruta March, where they could do God knows what to Nixon when he went by, but we held discipline, and on that day, we signed a giant People's Peace Accords there in the park, and the brothers and sisters that came that day froze themselves, but we maintained discipline and showed a larger anti-war movement that we could exist solely as an organization on our own principles. These national actions are chronicled in film and in print and in so many ways, but they didn't occur simply because VVAW existed. Robert J. Lifton didn't come to us simply because to begin the concept of post-traumatic stress disorder among Vietnam veterans and have us start his first national study group simply because we were Vietnam veterans. People needed answers, and we provided answers, we provided action, and we provided results. Thousands of people came to these events because brothers and sisters individually in small towns and chapters and small places across the country gave their sweat and their blood and their tears, and in some cases, their lives. Leafleting, selling newspapers, picket lines, demonstrations at the VA, setting up counseling centers for vets and GIs, doing that kind of work, the kind of work that showed we are more than a talking bullshit organization. We will provide for ourselves and we will provide for others. We will serve the people. We are activists. Activist means work, and work is what built this organization from the ground up, and work is what continues to build this organization and support our younger brothers and sisters in the other organizations today. The GI work, always one of my favorite activities, showed the kind of dedication of individuals standing out at the gates, military installations, working tirelessly, following up on contacts with active duty GIs, reaching out to the active duty GIs. All the way back then, guys like Mark Rovick and Ray Parrish, people were GI people from the very beginning and have worked for GIs in their blood, and never forget it. Even in the interim periods when there are no conflicts, though I'm hard-pressed to think of when that might be. These people are out there day and night. VVAW didn't do it alone. There was a GI movement. There were other people doing GI organizing, other people doing GI work, and believe me, we've been in a lot of coalitions. Coalitions are hard work. Coalitions are a major pain in the ass. But they have to go forward. They have to go forward. We have to always work with as many people. Coalitions have to be built as broadly and as deeply as possible. And then, you know, doesn't mean you got to go drinking and dancing with them afterwards. But you've got to learn to work. Well, yeah, who can't? But you've got to learn to do that work. And that had a lot to do with the success of ours and GI work and the whole GI movement in general. Believe me, there would not have been VVAW chapters in Japan and Okinawa and the Philippines and Germany and France and Sweden aboard ships and in places just incomprehensible if we hadn't done that work. And obviously we couldn't be everywhere. But when you do the work, when you are the activists, when you get the results, people will unite with you and people will work with you and people will join you. We always understood what made an organization. A name, a meeting, a march. No. What made an organization was service to the people. The individuals standing out there in the rain in front of the VA. The individuals going to the VA and getting maced and hammered by the Federal Service Police. It was service to the people. In the mid-1970s, as the war was winding down, we made a decision, criticized by a lot of people at the time, of war on the VA. We said that we had to step up. We had to step up the work that we were doing, fighting for post-traumatic stress disorder and fighting for our lives. There was some criticism of it. And we had to make people understand that war on the VA didn't mean war on the people that worked at the VA or war on the people who were in the VA. It meant war on the VA bureaucracy that was standing with its foot against the door to prevent post-traumatic stress disorder as we understood it at the time. What followed all over the country was a very similar pattern. We would go in and announce our intentions, and they would mace the room, and then they would beat us with their clubs, and then we'd go outside on the sidewalk and set up our picket lines and begin to do our outreach to the VA. And we fought until around the country, when the VA began to set up committees on how to deal with post-traumatic stress disorder, they either allowed us onto the committees or the people who we worked with on those committees demanded that VVAW be part of them, because there was no doubt who had led that fight and who was going to continue that fight. And it wasn't easy. The committee meetings were always fights themselves, but it was a step. It was a step in the right direction. And I remember watching some of our beautiful brothers and sisters getting beaten to the ground. But that's the kind of stuff you got to do if you want to get action, and that's what activists do. The concept of decent benefits for all veterans has always been and always will be our motto, along with peace and justice and whatever damned war we're fighting against at the time. Yeah. Annie said, start a war, we'll fight against it. You betcha. decent benefits for all veterans meant exactly that, simply because some veterans from other eras may have been disparaging of us when we returned and called us crybabies and a number of other things. And it didn't exactly enamor any of us to join a lot of the more traditional organizations as it was. But we persisted and we fought. And the kind of people that inspired us, I want to speak particularly of one right now. Probably the bravest woman that I've ever met in my life. A single mother, African-American woman, working in the Chicago VA, stepped forward and sacrificed her entire life and her whole career to let the people of the United States know that Agent Orange was killing Vietnam veterans and causing birth defects among their children, and that the VA was covering it up. And her name is Maud DeVictor. Maud launched a fight that continues to this day. A beautiful, beautiful woman who gave everything she had for us. And these are the kind of people that VVAW brings forward as activists and as human beings because of the very nature of the things we do. I don't mean to diminish anything else that occurred, certainly not the things that occurred in the 80s and 90s, some very difficult times, but some very, very, very hard fights that continue on into today. And that's why we have up here with us today a very distinguished panel of people to talk about some of these past events, to talk about the sort of activism that's going on today, and to talk about the road we're going to continue down into the future. Brothers and sisters, I salute you. I showed up kind of late, but then I do that, you know. I think we'll go with you first, Annie.
Okay. Do I have a mic? Oh, yeah.
This is Annie Hirschman, by the way.
Nice sound, people. My name is Annie Hirschman. Everybody awake? I've been with you, sorry lot, from the beginning because somebody had to take care of you. I've been through fighting with Al Hubbard because he was saying, yeah, we need medics, but you can't do anything to help anybody because they have to be feeling pain on the march. I've been with the guys in New York and the guys in Miami and California and all over the places. And I didn't prepare a big, long, soppy speech, just a couple of things. Remember the Nazis in Miami? Anybody here still remember the Nazis in Miami? Okay. We went to Miami and we were camped in South Beach, which is now a real trendy neighborhood with a lot of yuppies and Generation X's and Y's and Z's and Lord knows what else. And naked people, which could be fun. But at the time, it was a neighborhood that was full of working class folks from the Northeast that had come down to Florida to retire, and a significant number of them were Jewish, and a significant number of them were elderly, and some of them were Holocaust survivors. And when we got to the park, they barred their doors, boarded up their windows, and stayed in their houses and shook in their boots because they had been told by the police that we were evil, crazy veterans, all drugged out and going to hurt them in some profound way. And then the Nazis came, And I was coming back from treating, I think it was David Beals who had decided to have a relapse of his malaria that week. I don't know. You guys are always throwing shit like that at me. But, well, I'm the medic, damn it. And so I got back to the park, and Jack McCluskey and Danny Friedman said, the Nazis are here. We got to take care of it. By that time, about 1,200 of you guys had ringed the Nazis. And one of those stupid farts had picked up a chair and hit a guy named Steve in the head. He took 3 stitches. And Danny, anybody here know Danny Friedman built along the lines of a grizzly bear? Yeah. Danny picked up the chair, looked at it, and backhanded the Nazi with it. And I hear it took days to put him back together. But then we carried the Nazis, sort of 4 vets to a Nazi off the land. Because we didn't think they'd walk gently and politely. And by the time the last Nazi left the land, there was a little Jewish gentleman with a tattoo on his arm saying to me, so darling, these boys, they're so beautiful. They could come, they could use the bathroom, a shower, they could take a shower. Would they like something to eat, maybe? So I said, yeah, and then we got chicken soup, about 2 million gallons of chicken soup. And then a couple of days later, one of his friends came over. He said, so is there anything else we could do for the boys? We love them. They're so beautiful. And I said, well, they kind of like beer. And a lot of beer happened. It was good. We needed to hydrate. I got to be medical director in Miami because a gentleman, and I use that word very loosely, named Wacky Jack McCluskey. And if there's a thunderstorm this weekend, Jack, I will come up there and get your ass. Jack loved to bring thunderstorms wherever he went. But Jack McCluskey was there, and when I arrived in Miami, having gotten there from being in Gainesville when Pete Mahoney was arrested out of the car and the car was impounded, Jack said to me, oh, good, you're here. You're medical director. I'm going to get stoned. And I love you guys. So Wacky Jack, everybody knows Wacky Jack. The next big thing I remember with Wacky Jack that just stands out in my memory was standing on the knoll. Now, I had gotten married by the time this event happened. It was the dedication of the wall in Washington. And I don't know how many of you guys were there, but it was amazing. I mean, first I had to tell my fairly new husband at that time, sweetie, I'm going to D.C. with 60,000 guys. Is that okay with you? He, being a fairly good sport, actually agreed to that. And so I get there, and we're standing on the hill looking down at the wall, Jack and I, doing PTSD counseling with a whole bunch of people who weren't us yet and who were in need of it. And he looks down and he goes, Annie, look at that. It's a fucking eye chart. And I'm like, what? And we're looking at 60,000 guys walking up to the wall and stopping right before the names got clear in their vision. So, of course, guys with really good vision would stop about 40 feet away, and guys who had slightly less good vision were stopping 20 feet away, and the truly nearsighted were getting up to about 8 feet. And you see this ragtag line of guys just stop dead and taking a couple of deep breaths before they took that next step. And the names became clear, and the faces came out of the wall. But I'll never forget standing there going, shit, Annie, it's a fucking eye chart. And that's Jack McCluskey. And then, you know, things went on, time went on. The Vietnam War was over, but we were still active against all kinds of things. And get a call one night from Pete Mahoney in New York. And Pete says, I got a bunch of Russian Afghan vets coming to my house, and we need a bunch of people who know PTSD. Can you all come over for a week? I'm like, sure, Pete. And they're in 2 languages and several sorts of sign language. We taught a whole mess of Russian vets who had been in Afghanistan during their Afghan adventure, and their mental health providers who came with them had to do PTSD work while doing surgery on Jack McCluskey and hanging out with Hai Shaitan, another hero of this movement, Hai Shaitan. And now we're still here and we're still going on. How many people in this room have done something for peace this year?
Yeah.
Hello. We are still the heroes. We are still keeping on. We are still in our organizations, in our unions, in the American Public Health Association, when I do disability law forums, when all of you go anywhere. We're not stopping the fight for peace. We're not stopping, moving, keeping on. And we're going to be here in 5 years with even more fabulous stories and even more adventures and epics to go on. And because of us, because of people like the late Hai Shaitan, who spent I don't know how many decades fighting to get post-traumatic stress disorder put into the official Bible of mental health, the DSM, because of Bobby Lifton, because of course Maud DeVictor, and because of the activists now. Where are our IVAW folks? Our IVAW folks are our heroes as well. In a very medieval way of putting it, you lend us grace. You give us strength to keep on keeping on. Because of you, we have hope for our future and the future of our kids and grandkids. And hope for you guys. And this is where we're headed, working with, you want to talk about a coalition? VAWs, IVAW, VVAW, we rock. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Ward Riley, but I'm changing my name to wardpeace@hotmail.com legally. It's a pleasure and honor to be here, of course. Just coming here to meet so many of the people I've been involved with online has made it worth it, besides the wonderful people in the Times, meeting Horace and Dave Curry and Jeff Machota and all the people that do all the work here. I'm originally from Chicago. I grew up on the south side. I now live in Baton Rouge. I've been there most of my life, and that's where my roots are, and that's where the roots of my activism lives. When we moved down there in '63, it was still basically whites only, coloreds only, and it kind of blew my young mind. I never did understand it, and I still don't understand it, but things have changed a lot. But my activism background, I volunteered for the infantry 10 days after I turned 17 in 1971. I was assigned to the weapons platoon of Charlie Company 1st and 16th of Big Red 1, and I immediately became active in the GI resistance. It was just the way it was. The people like Barry and everybody that had come before us had set the stage, and by the time my 3 years came, we had literally taken over the military, and don't make any mistake about it. I mean, it was, fuck you, sir. I went to infantry school at Tigerland, also known as Little Vietnam, and 180 of us went into our AIT company, and only through truly the good luck of a high math score, they made 60 of us advanced gunners and sent us to gunner school. The other 120 they sent to Vietnam, and us 60 they sent to gunning school and set us all over the rest of the world where they needed gunners. And so by just the simple luck of a math score, I've avoided having my mind completely screwed in that way anyway. But while I was stationed overseas, I was overseas for 1,000 straight days in the weapons platoon of my company, and 3 of us decided to make a statement, and we all deserted in '72, and we just went and got a place to live, and 45 days later, 11 MPIs and CIDs kicked in our door, and we went back to our unit, and we all proceeded to get court-martialed and pled guilty, and I actually ended up getting 2 court-martials while I was in, and miraculously still ended up doing my 3 years and getting an honorable discharge for whatever that's worth. During the 3 years I was in, I told some of the older guys, I wish they could have just seen it. I wouldn't have wished them to have been in it, but I wish they could have just seen what happened to the military, because during those 3 years, the last combat took place, the draft ended, and the end of IETS 1 month after Nixon resigned. And we had a party in the infantry like I can't even tell you, and I blacked out basically until the Supreme Court appointed George Bush king. Which is when we all became reactive. It's been an amazing phenomenon to watch how most of us had settled into our lives. I mean, I married Melissa, my wife. We got married, celebrated our 31st anniversary, and we just raised our kids and tried to just do activism locally, which we did. But when it's just amazing how we were all able to just feel that this World War III was coming, and an amazing thing happened in Veterans for Peace and Vietnam Veterans Against the War. We all basically just re-upped around 2000, 2001, got back involved as Bill described, the very true and hard work of activism, which is not just getting on the internet and let's go meet over here in DC and raise hell, but it means going to meetings every single Monday since the summer of 2001. In Baton Rouge, and every Thursday in New Orleans. And by the time the war rolled around, we had already done 15 major street actions in Baton Rouge and New Orleans. We had a magnificent community forum to discuss the war. We had Senator Richard Baker, one of the biggest fascist neocons in the world, and 4 of us debated for pro-war people before the war started. And what was really amazing, that we did this at Louisiana State University, and the biggest hall they had sat 1,000 people, and we put 1,000 citizens in that place before the war started to discuss whether we should go. Our side won the debate, but we lost the big argument, because here we are in Iraq and trying to get into Iran. What I'd really like to talk about, we did many things. I was involved with Camp Casey with Iraq vets. I was privileged to know that Cindy was going to go before she ever went, so I was also privileged to have the first nationally published article about what was about to happen. I actually had it published in the Baltimore Chronicle the Friday before she went to Camp Casey. And the amazing thing about that whole thing wasn't so much that we did it and went to George Bush's house, but that we actually recaptured the media, which has been my personal objective for 6 years. I hold the media responsible for us being at war because they failed in their job. We exposed lie after lie. And as fast as they could lie, we could expose the lie with the internet, which is the most powerful and wonderful tool that ever happened to the world of activism. And we learned more on February 15th, 2003, when we were very active in the now famous February 15th worldwide demonstration, where 10 million people around the world came out simultaneously and said, please don't go to war with Iraq. And even though, again, we failed, and I consider myself a major failure because here we are in Iraq, it still was a very learning experience. It turned me on to the ultimate and completely incredible power of the internet, which is our best friend, and look for Big Brother to clamp down on it very soon. We also did, on Inauguration Day, we organized something that we called the Jazz Funeral for Democracy in New Orleans. We got about 10,000 people to march. We got the 3 largest jazz bands in New Orleans to join us. We got the New Black Panthers to join us. We got the American Native Indians to join us. And it was one of the proudest events. And literally, as George Bush was taking the oath again to defend the Constitution, we were burning the USA Patriot Act and the Constitution that he was violating. A little bit about what I think we can do. To preface that a little bit, you know, back when this country was formed, people like George Washington, when they went to the war, they went into the field. The Civil War came along, U.S. senators and representatives, they outfitted military units and they went and fought in the field. And the big change in this country now is these son of a bitches that send us to war sit on their ass in D.C. and send the poor to do it. And what I would really, really like to see, and I think it's very, very possible, is, during Vietnam, the age was basically 18 to 26 for the draft. Well, their excuse was, you need good, strong young men to endure the agony that the military is. But in this current group of neocon idiots, they've actually upped the age to 42 in the military. Now, they're so desperate now, they've waived all their, you can't be if you're a felon. Now, come on in if you're a felon. We don't care if you're a rapist or a murderer. Just come on into the military. We need your ass in Iraq. But my point is, they've raised the age to 42. There used to be a time when you had to be 18 to 26 basically to go if you were drafted, but now we're in a situation where their own system has shown us that, hey, it's okay if you're 42 or 52. Some of the nurses and people that go over there, they're actually in their 50s and 60s. And my big point here is that I think we could actually enact legislation that forces our congresspeople, if they vote to go to war, that they have to go to fucking war, period. That's the simplest, most effective thing. It's not an unreal concept, it's a completely real concept. And that's the biggest difference. Washington was in the field. Robert E. Lee and all those congressmen, they were militiamen. They went out into the field with their men because if the cause was worth fighting, and I'm not saying that, like you said, we're not pacifists here. If someone walks down my street, I'm going to kill them if they're trying to kill my kids. I'm sorry to say that. I mean, I wish for peace and love, and I'm all for it, but I'm not a pacifist. I will defend myself, and our leaders need to do that, and it's not so hard. Their own rules now in raising the age into the 40s and 50s where they say you're physically fit to go in, well, that automatically makes all those guys eligible. And I would like all of you to just take this thought back home to wherever you come from and force our legislatures, before they vote to go to war, that they have to fight, and it's simple. I mean, that's really all I have to say. That's the only revelation I can give us. That's the only thing I think that would singly stop unjust war from happening in this country if them and their kids had to go fucking do it. And that's, thank you.
All right, go ahead. Oh, I'm sorry. Hold on one second. Hold on.
Testing. It's all right, you can hear it? My name is Marty Webster. I'm the national wait a minute, let me try that again. I've never practiced it. Just keep going? Okay. My name is Marty Webster, and I am the National Organizing Secretary of Vietnam Veterans Against the War. Quickly, but unfortunately I did it in the shower. And when I was practicing it on the way over here, it went something like boo boo boo. So I immediately asked Ward Riley if he wrote one. He said, no, I gave him mine. I said, here, take this. And he went boo boo. And then I sat here while everyone else was talking, and I pulled pages, and then I looked at my other friend, Annie, and she has 11 lines. And I said, oh, shit. My grandmother was a charter member of the Army Nurse Corps in World War I. My father was in the islands in World War II. My brother was blown off a ridge in Korea and has 2 plates in his head. I was raised with a very strong military-patriotic background. I was raised through the 50s where it was my country right or wrong. And I carried this with me through the early part of my life. When Vietnam began, I decided something had to be done. And I, like a lot of our members, I was not drafted, I enlisted. I wanted to go to Vietnam to kill commies and make the world free of communism. But unfortunately, once a person steps foot in country, something happens. And if not the first day, before long, you begin to realize that there's something wrong. One of the greatest feelings that I felt in my life, because I love my country so much, was how could my country betray me? And then how I, as an intelligent, rational individual, allow this to happen to me? When I came home, there were no venues. There was no venues in churches or schools or places where people were sharing about war experiences and what can be done about the injustices. There were no people like Ward Riley for VVAW in the southeastern United States where people could go. There were no people like Bill Perry in Pennsylvania where people could go and have someone extend the hand to them. And there was a lot of chaos and confusion in those early days. I originally joined the organization in 1969. There was a lot of, there was a lot of drugs, and I came home in 1966 and I stayed drunk until 1973. Until I met a member from VVAW in New Haven, Connecticut, who extended the hand to me. And he put his arm around me and he said, "Son, you don't have to live this way anymore." I started attending some self-help groups. Not the VA, I assure you, I have never been to a VA counseling group. We had our own self-help groups. We went to Alcoholics Anonymous, and I will be clean and sober for 35 years. Like a lot of us, once the war was over, there was a lot of confusion going on in VVAW, a lot of other things taking place, and a lot of us sort of slipped away. I started by just not, paying my dues for a number of years, and they were kind enough to send me, the newspaper for an indefinite period. And then I basically dropped out and became involved in it. When Iraq started up and 9/11 started up, I said it's time for me to, as a lot of us, our brothers and sisters are doing, it's time to re-up and get re-involved and make a commitment to end this bullshit. The first person I started communicating with was my buddy over here, Ward Riley, and he gave me a lot of encouragement. And after about 3 months, Romo finally answered the phone at the national office. and I became a contact. Recently, there's been a position created. In this position, once again, I said as National Organizing Secretary. And what the national office felt needed to be done was have closer communication with our new members. I contact each contact, I would say, at least once a month, and most of you contacts out there have heard from me. If not, you will be hearing. And we go over things that people can do. A lot of what I've been hearing was, well, I've been a contact for 7 years. I don't know exactly what's expected of me. I've talked to people who are contacts who were said, I was really going to call up and I didn't know what to do, and I was afraid I was going to get in trouble for not doing anything. So we've established a list of things people can do, whether you have 15 members in your area or you're one member. And if anybody is really, we don't have time to go into this too much of it today, but if you speak to me afterwards, we can go over and talk in depth about a lot of these things. Another thing we're doing, we've had an influx of new members. We've had over 70 new members in re-ups this year. And what really, really touches my heart is the overwhelming number of these individuals are in-country Vietnam veterans. And they're coming up, they're standing up and saying, I was half-heartedly belonged in the first time, and they drifted away and they became members of the other alphabet soup veterans organizations, and they become disgruntled. And they start talking about things, about that bond that's between in-country veterans, and they need that. They can't explain it. Sociologists can't explain it. Psychologists can't explain it, but if you step 1 foot in country, you certainly can fucking explain it, I'll tell you that. And these people are looking for that camaraderie. And I'll tell you, out of these people, we've developed 4 new contacts, 4 new chapters, and these are chapters that are very, very active. We have a chapter in Camarillo, California, Steve Crandall. They have 15 new members. And they had just sent an email out where they were at a stand down a couple of days ago. And they represented our organization wearing T-shirts. We have another representative here that has just started a chapter, Carol Trainer from Louisville, Kentucky. And Carol, they had a Beatles memorial concert or something like that on Memorial Day. And Carol was there with permission. And she was holding up her sign which said, "Bring them home now." And the liberal mayor, Mayor Abramson, supposedly liberal mayor, progressive mayor in Louisville, Kentucky, did not like it, and he had Carol arrested. And Carol was brutalized by the local sheriff. She was due to be released at 7 o'clock at night, and the bastards kept her in there until 7 o'clock in the morning. She was charged with assault and a couple of misdemeanor charges, and her charges and everything have been expunged and everything has been taken care of, but the injustice still exists. And I would like to take a quick minute or whatever, second, that's what it is, to read something that she read on. This is sort of a guest editorial on Channel 3 in Louisville, Kentucky. I am a veteran, grandmother, and member of Vietnam Veterans Against the War at Louisville and Louisville Peace Action Committee. On Memorial Day, I was arrested for protesting the Iraq War at the Abbey Road on the River Festival. The event organizer explicitly approved my protest. I believe in law and order and support law enforcement. I also believe in my right to speak out against my government when it is wrong. These beliefs are part of our democracy. On Memorial Day, these benefits collided, and I spent 12 hours in jail. I was peacefully demonstrating against the war. Some did like my message because it interfered with their enjoyment. They complained and trashed my End the War sign. I objected. The sheriff paid by the event organizer, removed me in a conflict incurred. 2 charges were dismissed, and I am completing community service to expunge the 3rd charge. I remain proud that I stood up on Memorial Day. People need to speak out against wrongs like the Iraq War. We need to reduce by ensuring they are not being put in harm's way for a mistake. And our police and justice systems need to prevent collisions between law and order and free speech. This is critical to the way of our life. This is the caliber of new members and new contacts that we're getting in Vietnam Veterans Against the War. Contrary to popular belief, Vietnam Veterans Against the War is not a bunch of old men. We're not dying off. It's not a coffee clutch. And damn it, Carol, would you stand up? Carol, please stand. This is the type of member, and I truly believe that it's because of people like Carol Trainer that Vietnam Veterans Against the War will continue as a viable force and in the vanguard of the anti-war movement. I would just like to say very, very quickly in closing that I speak quite often and I speak out on the war resistors. And we will be having some Iraq Veterans Against the War speaking this afternoon, and they will expunge on this a little bit more. But what has happened is I have been getting a plethora of phone calls from people. It goes something like this: "Hi, my name is Mike. I'm having trouble with my employer." Through the efforts of Ray Parrish, I've dealt with quite a few of these situations, and I'm proud to say that I am part of an organization that stands 100% behind our war. In 1967, in the north of Ireland, the Brits started arresting IRA members and turning them in Long Kesh, and the Wolf Tones sang a song, "Stand Behind the Wire." Today, I would like to say and challenge every person in this room to stand 100% between our men and women and our Iraq vets who are standing behind the wire. And as far as I am concerned, being 100% behind our war resistance is probably right now the main reason I'm sitting here this morning.
Bailey's my name, VVAW's my game. No, we're not a bunch of old men, we're a bunch of old men and old women. I'm in a lot better shape than my mom was at my age, though. I talked to Barry this morning. Hey, Barry, what am I supposed to do up there? And Barry said, create new leadership. Thanks a lot. So I've been sitting here, my little 11 things that I wrote down are all based on creating new leadership. And, you know, we had objectives when I first I joined off the Playboy ad in December of 1970. And we fought over every word in those stupid objectives forever. Until some of the women just said, listen, we got a couple of principles of unity. Why don't we just stick to those and throw the rest of this crap out? We don't need it. And finally, we did. And our principles of unity are decent benefits for all veterans, regardless of discharge, regardless of service, regardless of wounds or no wounds. Decent benefits for all veterans. It's part of the cost of doing business. And the other principle, of course, is no more Vietnams, which we will never stop fighting for that principle. Never. One of the things that we've learned along the way is that the best things that happen, like everybody has said here, the best things that happen that get the most attention are the spontaneous things. Now, the medals being thrown on the Capitol steps in a pile marked trash, that was the big media event. But that same week, we went to a hearing inside that building where the commandant of the Marine Corps was proudly giving money back to the government that they didn't spend in Vietnam because Marines can do more with less. And out of the courtroom, the observers gallery, came a guy with one arm and hair down to his asshole, and he looked like he hadn't taken a bath in a week. Of course, the rest of us all looked the same way. But he had a Purple Heart in his other hand. And he walked up towards that commandant and he said, take it, take it. Pretty soon the whole gallery was going, take it, take it. That guy ran out the side door and down the hall, and that motherfucker's been having nightmares ever since. And lifers eat shit. Lifers eat shit. We all know that. So we gave him nightmares. If he's not dead, he's still dreaming about that. And so those are the kinds of things that make an impact, the spontaneity of things. And locally, we sort of accidentally stumbled into the war on the VA because we were just looking to have some fun and stick our finger in their eye. So we got the Beboop squad together. You know the Beboop squad, the ones that defaced all the draft posters everywhere and did little things that were a little covert. And the Beboops took over the administrative offices at the VA hospital by infiltrating and having everything timed and having distractions and the whole bit. We did an operation just to see if we could pull it off and stick our finger in their eye. And boy, that started something that has never stopped, because the administrative wing of the VA, it's have a seat, can I get you some coffee? there are some things that everybody needs to feel in their souls, which is camaraderie and the longing for peace, the longing, justice, and equality, because there'll never be peace without those. But there also needs to be a sort of sense of humor about things. Don't take yourself too seriously. The issues we're dealing with are the most serious ones facing human beings. And the easiest way to balance that out is to lighten things up. That's where guerrilla theater came from. We had so much fun. Where's Kermano? I wonder if he's got his bug ears. He was the FBI bug in Gainesville. And I mean, we have used that humor to accomplish our goals, and it's worked. It's worked almost every time. And the other thing is your social ties to each other. Don't forget to party. It's very important. And don't forget to pat yourselves on the back when you know you've done a good job, no matter how much crap you take from everybody else. Just don't forget each other, and don't forget to party. And my last story, of course, is the thing that makes me a legend in VVAW. I remember back in the day when we had campouts where there were 150 people, 20 of them were children, and it seemed like there were 200 of them. And I would be working in the kitchen, and they'd be all there, all together. Can I have soda? Give me a sandwich. I want peanut butter. And my reaction was, don't you have mothers? Yeah, they're not there. Okay. You better mind your manners. There was a pig roasting on a spit behind me. Or I'll eat your eyeballs. And they said, you wouldn't do that. I said, oh, yes, I would. I'm going to eat those pig eyeballs. When that pig is done, I'm going to eat those eyeballs. And you're going to know when I'm done that if you screw with me, I'll eat your eyeballs too. So the rotisserie was done. They pulled the pig off. They took a big axe and cut the head off, put it on a board. I took it up in front of the stage, called all the children together, grabbed a huge knife, made a big dramatic scene of digging out the eyeballs and eating them. One of the kids from Athens, Georgia said, can I have one? So, after that, I never had a single problem with any child at any event. It was always, Annie, dear, may I please have some soda? So you really can adults with humor. It works. And we have a little song that was made up by a bunch of Marines at Christmas time in 1968 in the hospital at Great Lakes Naval Base, where they were stuck.
This is for everyone who has spent one of those long, dreary Christmas mornings in country. Jingle bells, mortar shells, VC in the grass. Take your fucking Christmas tree and shove it up your ass. It just goes to show some of us will never be politically correct.
Quickly, I wanted to get back to Annie Hirschman on something that was very important in the history of the organization, and there have been books written about VVAW, but you have to do a lot of research to find this one. Make it quick, please.
Okay, two little things. One is the 5 of us who threw blood at George Bush Sr. in 1972. And the other is a little tiny piece called the Action at Wounded Knee in 1970. I was privileged to be a part of, wearing my VVAW button proudly.
Annie was actually at Wounded Knee inside, taking fire from the federal officers as a representative of VVAW and working as a nurse. Well, before we close this session, I just want to make sure that in my disparagement of coalition work that I talk about our ARN coalition that we have of VVAW and Gold Star Mothers for Peace and Military Families Speak Out and Iraqi Vietnam Veterans Against Iraq, Veterans Against the War, and the solid work that we do together and the growth we want to see from it. As you can see, activism takes many forms, and it's a continuing, changing, growing sort of thing, and this is just a small example of that sort of thing, and I see many of you in the crowd and know the sort of things that you've done and all the other examples we could give. The thing about being a volunteer, someone that volunteers, as many of us did, to go into the military, many of those people, when they return, become volunteers, not only for VVAW, but when they see something wrong in their communities, they stand up. And those kind of activists, the community activists who are Vietnam vets, face some of the most heavy repression from police and federal agencies that a lot of us have ever experienced. And I'd just like to mention a few names of people like Billy Dean Smith, whose life has been ruined by the U.S. military simply because he spoke out and was falsely accused of fragging officers. People like Geronimo Pratt, Vietnam veteran who came back and stood up and fought. And within the last few years has been reconciled and freed, actually worked hand in hand with some of our people in New Orleans in that area and such. And last and certainly not least, a man named Gary Lawton, who we carried a campaign for years to free. Gary Lawton was a Vietnam veteran and a community activist in Riverside, California, and he stood up for his community, and the police falsely accused him of murders and put him on trial and attempted to destroy his life for years. And VVAW made a national project of fighting up and standing up for Gary Lawton until the day he was freed. To say that brother's no longer with us, I don't know if his wife Chiquita is here or not, but we want to say that these are the people that typified VVAW, people who not only are activists against the war, against imperialism, against all the injustices that exist in our society, but people who stand up in their hometowns as well. Thank you very much for putting up with this panel.